Well, good morning. I would say let's start right away by welcoming you and introducing ourselves. Today, my colleague Roberta and I will host this webinar titled Reducing the Attack Surface and Optimizing IT Processes with Ivanti Neurons. Obviously, the main topic of the entire Ivanti portfolio in the recent period and in the last year is that it has had the greatest number of evolutions and developments. And we know that many of you participating in this webinar today are evaluating this product with us. We take the opportunity to review what has already been presented to us, to present the new features even to those who do not know us, and we are going to place the Ivanti Neurons platform, as I was saying, within a broader context. And indeed, today we will have the focus on two of the features, two of the objectives that can be achieved through the platform, namely reducing the attack surface and optimizing IT processes. Let's start immediately with the explanation. A very brief introduction of what Ivanti Neurons is, and one of its main objectives, which is, first of all, Ivanti Neurons is a cloud platform, a SaaS platform, which aims to improve the alignment between the world, the IT department, and the security department. Why did we set this focus on why? Because during a study conducted not only by Ivanti staff, but also by companies that primarily focus on conducting surveys, identifying studies, we all realized that a better alignment, a better coordinated and cohesive point of view within the security department and the IT department brings extreme benefits. 3 here. Some of these benefits are summarized in the slide you see, starting from the optimization of the experience of what is precisely the users who enjoy services that are then actually provided by the IT and security departments. They can provide them and thus reduce what we call operational friction, therefore improving the use of tools by end users and further reducing the so-called friction between the departments themselves concerning the IT world. Another goal is to accelerate the time to value. So to put new people who, for example, have joined the company in a position to be operational in the shortest time possible. So accelerating this so-called time to value, because often the time from when a resource is onboarded to being fully operational at 100% is quite long. And as the last advantage, that of improving the operational efficiency of the teams themselves in the world of the IT and security department. Why? Because often the work done behind the scenes is often manual integration work, especially when dealing with audits or gathering information. Very often there is an infinite number of tools available, but there is integration work that is done manually, and this indeed causes a significant loss of time that could be dedicated to something else. So I mentioned reports and investigations that have been conducted within both our clients and of organizations in general, and indeed the data that emerged supported what was and is Ivanti's idea that we promote, namely the so-called data silos, which are blocks of data related to the infrastructure, which very often differ from each other. Because we have end solutions, each of these solutions has its own amount of data to export, and each time the fact of not having the possibility Exchanging information efficiently and dynamically between various departments can slow down response times when it comes to security incidents. And 53% of the respondents say that not only do they slow down, but they can also weaken the security posture of the entire company. Let's go a little more into detail about what the Ivanti ecosystem is. Then my colleague Roberta, in the second part of this webinar, will also do a demo, so you will have the opportunity to see directly what the platform looks like, what its modules are, and how to achieve these objectives. We were saying Ivanti Neurons, how does it work, and what are the main features to use to achieve these objectives. First of all, let's talk about obtaining information in an extensive and cohesive way. Having information that provides the possibility of having in a single pane of glass or in a single dashboard data coming from all the sources present in the company. It has the task and the tools to improve the employee experience and use the information collected within this digital experience score to then go further and thus act as a trigger for the construction of automated workflows that have more than one function, which can prevent problems that may arise on users' devices or automatically perform all those manual actions that are done daily. Let's think about compliance. Let's think about controls. Let's think about testing the functioning of some services and some solutions, in addition to helping us keep the so-called security posture under control, meaning the security status of my machines with a particular focus on patching and exposure management. I mentioned the topic of patching not by chance, because indeed we have it is an absolutely fundamental topic for managing what is the attack surface. Recently there has been a shift from a concept of I have to manage patching and therefore I have to apply patches to the vulnerabilities of my infrastructure, so my installed base. But recently, also due to the fact that there is always a growth of attacks for a bit and of security attacks, the security of our department needs to extend this concept, and so we need to start talking about what the attack surface is. Attack surface, which is mainly composed of three elements, three categories. What we call managed assets, which is the classic so-called installed base, therefore the set of all endpoints, servers, information coming from the network, mobile devices, internet domains, and IoT devices. We need to add to this portion, which is what we say we already know, what we should know within our network. We need to add what is perhaps the most dangerous part, namely the unknown assets. That is, all those devices that are connected to our network but whose existence we are unaware of. Because, and here we enter the enormous realm of shadow IT, and therefore all those devices that have proliferated on our network, for example, personal devices connected to the company Wi-Fi, in addition to the issue of unauthorized cloud stores, so storage, more than stores, where perhaps company data is entered or saved that should remain within the company storage solutions provided and authorized code repositories, credentials no longer used, up to what we call third-party assets. Because we know very well that all companies rely on consulting firms. or they use hosting infrastructures, cloud services, APIs with which a connection to third-party services is developed and over which there is generally little or no control. So we need to amplify, expand our idea of installed base, and therefore work on the topic of attack surface. Another point and element of, we can see what I just told you through this graph, which basically says, okay, it relates the visibility of the attack exposure and the surface. So the known asset, those that are the devices that I know. So obviously, the closer we get to the center, the more we are in the safe zone, the further we move away, the more it is the area where we absolutely need to acknowledge. To take the courage and equip ourselves with a solution that can help us identify these devices, these solutions, these services, and apply patches in case of vulnerabilities or the required corrective actions. If we can also see what I told you from a point of view of exposure management model, that is, I don't just have to, once I've applied my patches, identified the devices, applied my patches, I have to do a job continuous. And here, even more so, it requires a cooperation between the IT operations department and the security department, because only by working together virtuously is it possible to reach this maturity model. That is, to move from a traditional situation which in our image is represented by the little man. The crawling little man, meaning I identify which patches there are. I do a manual prioritization, and above all, I rely only on the CVSS score that is distributed directly by the vendors until reaching a situation where there is the little man running, meaning I go from the first section of my attack surface, so managed nodes, until I can identify what are also the third-party services. I apply my patches without doing a manual analysis and reprioritizing manually, but relying on solutions like Ivanti that can help me effectively prioritize these patches based on information that comes from proprietary knowledge-based Ivanti, from third-party services, and above all, the fundamental thing is, Ivanti's risk-based vulnerability management system can update in real time the prioritization of patches based on vulnerabilities that are being exploited. The classic example we give is the supplier who publishes the fact of having a vulnerability and distributes the patch, self-assigning a CVSS score that can be medium, not particularly severe, but that same vulnerability in the following days is exploited. If we have prioritized relying solely and exclusively on the CVSS score, obviously that prioritization is no longer valid, because in the meantime the risk of this vulnerability, and therefore the urgency of this patch, has increased. Once I have managed in a way dynamic, intelligent in doing this prioritization, I apply my patches, but my work, once the patches are applied, is not finished. Why? Because I move to the next step, which is to recheck what the status of my security posture is at that point. And I have to carry out all those other necessary actions that do not necessarily pertain to the world of patching. So I have to collaborate with the security department because there are open ports, there are credentials that have been identified in the network. In short, there are a whole series of other things, actions I need to take to maintain my optimal security posture. And this absolutely must be a virtuous cycle. It shouldn't be an action done once and then completely abandoned until the next month or 2 months later. It's a continuous action, a continuous job, an important job for which, without tools that help us perform these daily actions, it becomes truly difficult to reach the run situation of our MI. We talked about how to reduce the attack surface, but we also need to find a way to make our actions within the operations department more efficient. And here, what helps us is what is called the Digital Experience Score. Digital Experience Score, which is a value within the Neurons platform that allows us to have a pulse on the situation and enables us to immediately make decisions, to launch tasks, launch automations, workflow automation, so we can to definitively close, for example, a case that had been opened, to prevent a case from being opened because through the analysis of the text score, we can anticipate that the user might have problems because we immediately realize that their machine is experiencing a drop in performance, for example. Or we can use the text score to see that, obviously integrated with the TSM system, for example, there is a negative sentiment issue, potentially negative from that user because there are many open cases in the help desk, or that are pending, or that numerous cases have been opened in the past. So the combination of all these functions, that is, starting from the disk, start with the world of discovery. I improve the visibility of information within my department, within my installed base, therefore my attack surface. I collaborate with the security department to improve operations. All this information goes into my text score calculation. If the text score is positive, great. Everyone is happy. If it shows signs of suffering or has some problem, I can use automation to improve and activate self-healing operations. I can, through the Neurons platform and through the DEX score calculation, also integrate sentiment information and integrate directly with chats, such as Teams, for, at the end of the case, the closure of the case. For example, conduct a survey directly with the user to ask how satisfied you are with the resolution of the case, or I can simply, without tying myself to the incident help desk world, ask questions and gather information directly from my user base. In this slide, there are some examples of bots. So these workflow automations that can help us manage better and prevent the emergence of cases at the help desk. There are different categories that we scrape, as you can see, which we have enhanced to encompass these examples. Use automation to improve the knowledge of our information and eliminate devices that should not be within our network. Improve and prevent the emergence of issues. Automation with respect to the closure or of an operation directly on the machines, up to reaching the world of observability, analytics, and the administration part. So using these workflows allows us to extremely reduce the average time for resolving problems and operations on our installed base. The solution of the platform, also called Neurons Tax, it consists of these four, We can summarize these four functionalities. So the entire discovery and inventory part, the entire self-healing automation part, real-time monitoring to gather all the information, and consequently more effective and efficient troubleshooting and remediation. At this point, I would leave the floor to my colleague.
And indeed, it gives us a demo of what the platform is and gives color name and surname to all those things that have been told to me up to this point. Thank you very much, Sarah. So I will go ahead and share my screen with you directly so I can tell you a bit about our Neurons platform, some information about Neurons. Neurons is a full SaaS platform. It is a platform hosted on Azure for all, obviously European clients. It is based in Frankfurt, so absolutely everything is compliant with the various European directives, including the corresponding GDPR part. So as you can see, Neurons, I start from what is the Neurons dashboard. Neurons is a platform that allows me to collect, as my colleague mentioned, all the data coming from different sources. Such data are visibility level data, therefore to optimize the visibility of my environment, of all my assets that belong to the corporate organization. But it also allows me to collect all the data related to the security posture. So it's somewhat of a link between what are actually the operations teams related to the infrastructure and the actual component, which is then the part that deals with security. The last element that Sarah showed you in the slides is precisely the concept of DEX. For us, the DEX is the ultimate result. We are moving towards what is the final paradigm of Gartland, which is the autonomous management of the endpoint component, securing these devices, and then achieving what is effectively the optimization of the digital experience. Be aware that the digital experience has two sides. This coin has two different sides. The first is how I, on the IT side, am offering a service like this. And the second part is how this service is actually recognized and perceived by the end user. In the realm of DEX, there are various drivers included in the calculation, let's say, within our algorithm, because they are linked to what is effectively the performance of the device, so how the machine or server is performing, on which I am obviously making my observations, how it is performing from an application point of view, so if there are actually functional crashes at the level of the applications installed on the machine, as well as the security posture, meaning the exposures I might have on that particular object. Another element that falls within the DEX core, if configured, is the integration with ticketing systems, such as ours or perhaps the ServiceNow component, so I can identify the number of tickets within that have the specific device as the subject, therefore the specific object. This means that if I obviously have an object that has been impacted by 10 tickets in the last 10 days, obviously this is an object that will have a very low DEX. Another element that falls within the DEX, the surveys, which my colleague mentioned earlier, so the possibility of understanding what is the actual sentiment of the end user through the use of surveys. All the data is collected within this dashboard and obviously has all the possible indications to provide an overview both from a traditional inventory perspective and also from an exposure perspective. I will also show you the component displayed on this screen regarding patching, where we will place particular importance on the compliance reports. Compliance reports that allow you to have a clear view of your internal patching process and enable you to see it on a timeline, for example, 1 year, and understand the levels of service you're obviously offering. Let's start right away with the basic concept, both from the perspective of Ivanti's strategy and from the logic of what is the foundation of security, namely visibility. The Ivanti Neurons solution allows for visibility from different points of view therefore complete visibility, because I obviously have visibility of the various objects that can arrive through traditional discovery elements, such as active or passive discovery. A discovery obviously related to everything that is installed within the machines at the application level. A discovery also related to the presence of these objects within other tools. And therefore, we are talking about discovery for connectors. These are just, let's say, the inbound connectors that the Neurons platform provides out of the box. So they just need to be configured. They can all be configured, or obviously only those of interest can be configured according to needs. Consider that we cover the market-leading solutions. For example, the entire ecosystem is covered. Obviously, Microsoft solutions, like I mentioned before, ServiceNow, are covered. For a dual reason, I can receive data coming from ServiceNow, for example, about users or what can obviously be the tickets, but I can also, through our BOT system, meaning automatic processes, open or update tickets in that system. There is all the information related to security, both from solutions that may be installed within the machines like Rapid7 or CrowdStrike, or moving towards the true security logics, thus speaking of vulnerability assessment scanners. In this case, we have both the Qualys and Tenable components available. The connectors are not only inbound, but there are also, and these have been released in the last few weeks during the latest updates, outbound connectors, specifically one among them being the Splunk component. Once I have collected the data coming from also from third parties, I have a way to perform two types of analysis. I have a way to perform an analysis, let's call it traditional, so static, on the characteristics present within my entire installed base, where I already have a series of charts available to see specific situations compared to what is the specific issue, so application error, disk space, and so on. I also have a way to perform data reconciliation. This tool, which actually seems trivial but is not, is practically the automatic conception of when you have n sources and need to cross-reference Excel files to perhaps identify the machine that needs to be fixed. Here, this tool does it automatically, so it assists you in analysis. Of the traditional type, where I, simply by scrolling these sliders, try to understand which objects I have on a certain source, but that maybe should also be in another, and so I have a way to rectify the current situation. This is the first type of analysis, but actually I have an analysis that is much more interesting, which is real-time analysis. Usually, when you start, because the basis is the visibility and management of what is my endpoint ecosystem, I tend to have a static management and visibility. So I collect the data that I have historicized, even with intervals that can be quite frequent, but I have data that turns out to be static. In reality, this module does something different for those who work, obviously. So those who access the console are also able to perform analyses from a security and endpoint compliance posture perspective because it works in real time. Real-time work is based on what is obviously our agent that operates on MQTT, which is a protocol typically used in the IoT component and is particularly lightweight to enable these real-time interactions. Consider that obviously in this case I am in an environment of my sales engineer colleagues where I have 62 machines, of which 40 are online, so I can directly request queries and ask for targeted information from the devices that are online. I can do it also on the offline ones, of course. When they connect to the network, they will send the notification to our console. I'll show you, for example, the features of the queries possible out of the box within the platform, where I obviously have everything categorized by areas. So as I was saying before, the link between the two areas, therefore the security component, the health component, which is more operational to understand how the machine is performing, and obviously the entire inventory component, which is optimized precisely for the concept of visibility. Now I'll show you, for example, the security dashboard, which might be interesting, where I have real-time information of my endpoints. So the health status, the component perhaps, this obviously was configured by my colleagues, so the account control part enabled or disabled, BitLocker, antivirus. So regarding the distribution on my installed base, the firewall, and so on. The interesting thing is that through this Edge intelligence tool, I can also set alerts, actions directly on several of these queries. So if I find the firewall deactivated on the machine, it is, like in a traditional monitoring system, automatically activated when it is detected. Once everything is analyzed, so after this real-time analysis, I can then have a specific and complete view of the object. I can have the data, a view that encompasses all the information that I, as Ivanti, capture, plus those from third parties. So, for example, if I go to retrieve a device, now I retrieve a machine that the sales engineer colleagues have made available to me. We select the machine of a French colleague of mine. Let's see what we have in this group so I can show you exactly what the view is and especially what actions can be performed on that object. And I'll also show you something interesting that's in preview, where there's a diagnostic component based on AI. So by writing the question in natural language, I get a whole analysis that obviously reports what the causes might be. As you can see in this first screen, I have the complete view, including the DEX core component enabled, obviously in relation to the various indicators. Fortunately, this machine is behaving well. The colleague has an absolutely positive DEX indicator, so there's no need to worry about anything. What is indicated then, of course, are all the performance components with specific details on the machine, where I can also kill processes, kill services, restart them, and so on. So think about your service as well. When we talk about optimizing effort, think about your first or second level service desk that needs to perform activities on the machine. It doesn't need to access the machine to perform activities, but it is done completely remotely, thus optimizing operational effort. Obviously, I also have the possibility, if it is connected, to see the tickets related to the machine, to the specific object, with the network console integrated directly within the platform. Here too, operational effort is optimized. I don't need to call the user or perform operations remotely. I have the same real-time component seen before also on the specific machine, where I can go and check in a targeted way. Okay, let me see now if there are actually any active failed logons on this machine. Fortunately, as I was saying before, it is behaving well. The machine is absolutely compliant. There are no specific issues. Obviously, the view, always from a visibility perspective, both from the installed software side, meaning what is installed on the machine, if there are any associated licenses and so on. The entire view is still visibility related to patching, where there is even the possibility to go and select the missing patches and then do it directly from here if the operator obviously notices the problem. An event history, so the classic one you know from Microsoft, is remote within the platform, allowing me to see issues related to applications, application crashes, and various warnings. Another fundamental thing I want to show you is also the diagnostics part. Obviously, then there are the movements of the DACs, any exposures present on the machine, etc. This is the latest arrival. It's a feature still in technical preview, so we'll show it to you directly as a preview. In this case, I don't know the direct use of this machine, but I can directly make a query to understand. There have been crashes inside the machine, particularly Outlook. I have a whole series of analyses conducted by our sensors that provide me with a response regarding any concerns about that specific object. Obviously, once the sensor is finished, the diagnostics directly tell me if it actually detects problems with the application I entered, specifically the Outlook component. So as you can see, there are a whole series of analyses done for the different elements. Important thing, the actions you see here on the right. These actions are of two types. There is a first part of actions that are custom actions. They are out-of-the-box actions that also change based on the device, because simply I could also have connected to our mobile solution. I could also have the mobile device that is visible within this platform. But the interesting thing, besides having remote control, the ability to run scripts, and obviously to open or update an incident on TSM systems, is that I have the ability to call up custom actions. What does that mean? Always think about when you might have a problem within the company that you know you need to solve by performing certain activities. These activities translate into automatic processes that are then used, perhaps launched directly from here with custom actions, so on demand based on what the specific service might be. Or it could also be a process that runs automatically to provide a specific output. And here we always return to the efficiency regarding the operation. Speaking of this efficiency improvement, I'll show you a bit of the core of what our concept of automation is. Bots. What are bots? They are generally business processes. In the end, the name neurons comes precisely from this, which allows me to transform my reactive management logic into proactive logic. So I already have a way to start with these, let's say, processes that are already these bots that are already defined within the console, where each client can obviously take the processes they are interested in automating and customize them to activate them in the short term within their own company. As you can see, there are several related to various topics. I'll show you two that are of particular interest here, specifically in reducing operational effort. The first is the disk cleaning component, a traditional operation, so basic, but it is an operation that must be done and is certainly time-consuming in the end. So in this case, when I go to create the draft, I'll show it to you just to help you understand how the process is created. I have a whole series of queries, so events that I can capture out of the box within my endpoints, or a series of actions also out of the box that I can go to use simply by doing drag and drop, or a whole series of possible operations between filter. I can set join the data, I can set variables within or actual filter functions to then complete, also perhaps with an interaction. That could be an interaction, as mentioned earlier, by the colleague with Teams. In this case, what does the bot simply do? It checks the disk space. Now I'll reduce it a bit in the view. Then it directly asks the end user if the bot can operate on the machine at that moment or not. In this case, what happens? Obviously, depending on the response, I can modify the flow. Now let's leave this bot, which is quite classic, let's say, of the standard ordinary operational part. It's an example that I often use during these demo sessions because I want to show you instead the pinnacle of complexity. That is the migration from Windows 10 to Windows 11. In this case, the colleagues have engineered a specific bot that allows me to do the first part, which can obviously be the compatibility, to then actually perform the migration. And in this case, we're talking about a significant optimization of effort and operational time. Now I'll show you. I reduce just the view to make you understand how complex a bot can be and how many situations can obviously be managed automatically by leveraging what is obviously the technology mapped onto your internal processes. The bot can then also be seen from a point of view. I use the bot for security issues. Think about the compliance you have internally. So each machine must have certain levels. So basic applications installed, maybe an active firewall, specific antivirus present. All these elements can be controlled, verified, and inserted into a bot to then perform remediation actions directly. Moving on to the security component, we have seen so far the effort part, thus optimization of operational effort. But what does it mean from a security point of view? Well, it means optimizing internal processes that are already standard. And how do we do it? We do it mainly by observing the patching process in the various patching campaigns. We have some tools that generally, with the various clients who have adopted the solution, are being used with satisfaction. The first among all is patch intelligence. What is patch intelligence? Patch intelligence is a solution that allows me to understand, in relation to all CVA vulnerabilities, the bulletins that come not only from Microsoft, but also with Patch Tuesday and also from third parties, to have a clear view mapped directly onto each environment. How is this analysis done? It is done by analyzing, of course, apart from the various industry databases, all the information that Ivanti acquires. Reason why I can have directly the entire list of available vulnerabilities, therefore the CVA, the various bulletins that have been released, and as you can see, there are quite a few at this moment where I have, however, a whole series of data that come not only from the specific manufacturer, but also, when available, from the analysis component done by Ivanti, or also data related to what might be the characteristics linked to reliability. That is, how stable a released patch actually is, and if there have been any issues, if there are any connected issues, and obviously what the vulnerability rate is, which allows me to understand if that patch is actually critical. Particular attention to those vulnerabilities that have this little monster attached, because this indicates that there has indeed been an exploit. So this vulnerability has been used for potential data breaches. But how do I transform all this information into useful information for my environment? Simply by clicking on this button. In this way, I have visibility of what is happening in my specific environment, so I can understand where to intervene. So, with the possibility of also defining what can be a threshold, obviously of SLA for intervention. In addition to this view that starts from the vulnerabilities, we have a second view that instead starts from what is my installed base. And in this case, we also talk about risk score. Risk score is particularly useful because it not only checks the posture of the specific machine, but also verifies the attacks. Active during the period in which everything is being observed, those that are perhaps the reports present on the dark web, to have a unique score of how much it is actually at risk, therefore what the attack surface on my machine is. In this case, I have a way to get a general health status of my setup And I have the possibility to have this risk score to check the critical elements present within the environment. Obviously, this solution, once the analysis is done, can obviously patch everything with the classic management for the different obviously here we are not only talking about workstations, but also about servers with the various characteristics. And I can define tasks to perform before the patch, tasks after. I can define here what to patch and what not. I can define which vendor to patch and which not. Or use, for example, the related risk score for one's own campaigns, and thus shift the logic from a logic, okay, I patch everything, which tends to take more time, from a logic of prioritizing, so we prioritize the patching process. One particularly important aspect related to these solutions is the one concerning reporting and the compliance component, also from a patching process perspective. In fact, from this point of view, I can go and verify the compliance reporting that indicates how I, as a company, am carrying out my campaigns. It's very useful. Now, I always take the colleagues. I have the process and I can go check its progress directly. For example, now I go directly to January in such a way as to have exactly what the trend is over the year, so I can understand if I am actually meeting the SLAs that have been given to me. Consider that this is particularly useful when the whole component of European directives comes into play. So whether we are talking about NIS2 or the financial or publishing sector, this component is particularly useful. Another fundamental element is the connected reporting part, because I have a whole series of out-of-the-box reports that I can simply go to populate compared to my devices, and that I can obviously schedule to send for audit purposes, precisely to verify the characteristics and the exposure of my installed base. Now I will click on the first one just for convenience to show you a type of template. This is just now the view on the optimization of, therefore, the risk exposure related to patches. Actually, now I'll show you another area that always completes the concept of discovery, that is, how these objects are seen perhaps from the outside. So here we also move to a slightly different concept of asset, because in this case the asset can be the same domain. I'll also switch consoles if I can. Let's see if... here it is. Because I would like to show you directly in an environment that was created specifically to activate this feature, which is related to the exposures seen from the outside. So I can define what are the SADs linked to the API related to the domain, or simply to specific URLs, in such a way as to start a scanner that allows me to understand if there are any associated vulnerabilities. In this case, all the vulnerabilities that can then be divided, let's say, by the application group in the workspace. I can, for example, if I select one, understand the degrees of vulnerability for the various elements, if there are any assets specifically impacted in the specific area. And therefore, with the various details also related to the criticality, I can see from this view what the actual exposure is with the level of criticality. So here too, I can retrieve information that, together with the patching part, along with all the data we collect from a visibility standpoint, create this unique vision, this unification between the operational view and the security-related view. Sure. Now, the security component can also be expanded with logics related specifically to the application domain, such as the application control component. Application control, especially regarding European directives, is actually one of the elements that various companies are increasingly requesting, precisely because another element that allows me to optimize security is definitely access to applications. In this case, I have a way to manage directly. Now I return here so I can show you directly what application control is, with the possibility to create application whitelists, blacklists, and to create, or maybe on the application or on specifics, I can grant access. The uniqueness of our application control is the logic of trusted ownership, meaning I can define for various applications who the trusted users are, so as not to allow the use of those applications by other users in any way. And I can also, of course, manage what is the logic of privilege management. So I grant administrator privileges, perhaps not to the machine. Actually, I remove them for security optimization, but only to the specific application where I define that elevated privilege. So this is a bit of an overview, let's say a quick run through, because actually discussing the neurons part in detail would take hours and hours to go over the specific functionalities. But at this point, I'll leave the floor to you if there are any questions.
Exactly. We received a few questions actually, but I preferred to let you finish the demo, also because many things were partially answered within the demo, but I think it's worth revisiting them. The first one we received is, how does Ivanti integrate with existing security tools and infrastructure? So if we can briefly review the topic of integrating the Ivanti environment within existing security tools and infrastructure. So let's go back to the world of connectors, how the agent works, and that part.
So absolutely yes, I'll show again the connector component that allows me to optimize and retrieve the relevant information. And in particular, maybe I'll show you the connectors related to what are generally the market-leading solutions for those areas. And I'll show you how, for example, the CrowdStrike component, which is generally a solution we see widely installed also in combination with our solutions both on premises and cloud. Then moving towards those solutions perhaps that I showed you earlier from Rapid7, still staying in the same realm as CrowdStrike or Qualys or Tenable regarding the vulnerability assessment component. Consider that to create the connector, once the solution is made available on the other side, it is possible to connect depending on the possibilities. So if towards an actual machine that perhaps can be installed specifically for access, or maybe through direct connection to a cloud service, they can be connected with service credentials and thus retrieve all the various information. These pieces of information that come from the connector obviously circulate also for the calculation of the digital employee score.
Perfect. Next, a classic question we are asked very often. Topic: OS deployment. So when it is planned, if it is planned, and what the timelines are.
So actually we have already started, maybe you haven't realized it, but there is already the fundamental element to then go on to develop the OS deployment part, because during these last 6 months, even a little more, the prepared servers have also been delivered, which is one of the elements needed for OS provisioning. There are the first signs, so there are already some small features that have been integrated precisely to then complete the functionality, and I confirm that this is on the roadmap according to the indications that I may have already given to some of you for the first half of next year. So rest assured that as soon as we have this feature, we will call you all back to give you targeted information.
Exactly. Then a question that perhaps is worth exploring further offline. in the sense that it's necessary to understand well what the needs are. However, Ricardo tells us, regarding the part about bots, they could also be useful to notify the user if the OneDrive client is not active at the moment, to prevent changes from being made only offline with the user thinking they are online. So, let's say that in my opinion, we're more in the realm of verifying an active service or conducting a sort of functionality test.
Yes, correct. But bots can still be activated to actually check the status of an application. So consider that with the bot, you can generally manage practically 70 to 80% of the issues which are evident and known. So these specific cases are also managed precisely to prevent the user from opening a ticket, which is one of the fundamental things to reduce the impact both on operations and then on the digital experience.
Okay. Third question, is it possible to roll back a patch applied from the platform?
Yes, from the latest versions, yes.
Yes, exactly. It's one of the latest features released, the ability to do it.
They'll roll back.
So then what does the connector for EPM on-prem allow to import and receive in Neurons?
So the EPM connector basically allows you to bring up the entire inventory component. So generally, if you're talking about EPM, it will definitely be one of our clients. What does it allow us to do? It fundamentally avoids scanning objects and obviously optimizes what can be a hybrid scenario. Generally, what is the suggestion though? Considering that when you have a hybrid scenario, you need to consider which features to activate on one or the other, because very often in Neurons, a top is used compared to what are traditional endpoint management tools. So from this point of view, since the agent is installed on the machine anyway, one can decide to either use the connector for the inventory, but certainly a faster option is to optimize directly by activating the scan on the Neurons agent. It is very light in terms of management, allowing all actions related to the agent, so I can use bots and so on. However, with the PM connector, I already populate the visibility of the information on the managed assets.
Thank you. They are asking if the functionality to select the patch and distribute it to a group of devices immediately is available. Actually, yes, that is, it can be done by immediately creating a patch. Absolutely, yes. Yes, absolutely. And then, yes, it is possible to do it. Absolutely. The last two, a very classic one, which is what is the licensing of the platform?
Yes, that question is super traditional. So we're talking about subscription. Obviously, it's a service. It's a SaaS service based on devices. I remind you that you can enable the connector, so there is no license attached to the use of the connector.
Exactly. So being per agent, we count how many agents have been implemented.
Yeah.
The last one, and then I should have told you all of the questions we received, is how the platform behaves in case of integration with an existing endpoint management solution, for example, Intune.
So this is a case, also that one, let's call it traditional, because actually many of our clients use Intune for the component maybe of mobile management or management of, let's say, the Windows workstation devices. In reality, Ivanti comes to the rescue when you want to activate targeted features that are not present in the E3 or E5 plans of Microsoft by implementing the platform for the complete view with the entire discovery component, remote control, the possibility of having an application controller, privilege management, and the part, obviously, of patching from third parties, which is a part, which is very often implemented, let's say manually implemented, to address the lack of specific functionality on the Intune side. and which is automated using a tool, the third-party patch for Intune that is part of the patch ecosystem I showed you earlier. So it's a traditional scenario. Yes, we work together with Microsoft precisely to optimize, to cover those functional gaps you might have in the solution.
Great, thank you. We should have answered all the questions. I don't see any others. In any case, as you have seen, I noticed that some of you might have seen it earlier. On the banner, it is possible to request a demo within the Documents section. There is the link to the specific page. You will also find two other links. The first one is related to the solutions that Ivanti offers for attack surface management, and indeed everything in the security area that we saw today. And a very, very interesting read, in my opinion, which is the State of Cybersecurity report that Ivanti publishes every year. So today the one for 2025 is available. The one for 2026 we will probably see in the second quarter of next year. And it contains, in my opinion, a lot of interesting information and an overview of how the situation is going at the level internationally on other companies. At this point, I would say goodbye to everyone and thank everyone. Of course, we are here. It was a pleasure to have you with us for this hour of demo. I hope to see you again. We hope to see each other soon to delve deeper into these topics, and that this session was interesting for you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Have a good day.